Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched The Mandalorian season 2.5. I mean, the Book of Boba Fett season 1. Let's talk about it. So yes, I watched the Book of Boba Fett, and before we begin, I have to clarify, okay, I have to put up this disclaimer that I am not the world's biggest Star Wars fan. I am not a Star Wars fan girl. I don't know a lot about the Star Wars lore. I have watched all of the Star Wars that have Star Wars'd. I've watched all the Star Wars films and major projects, except for the animated stuff. I haven't watched the Clone Wars series. I haven't watched the series from last year that they had. So yeah, like my TV knowledge is limited when it comes to the films, and when it comes to the streaming shows that we've gotten, like The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. I have some intermediate knowledge. Like, I'm able to recognize characters. It's not great, guys, but I'm just going to be speaking from the perspective of a fan of The Mandalorian and a general fan of this franchise who appreciates it when it's done really, really well. If you want to hear my thoughts on the Book of Boba Fett, then keep watching. But before we get into all of that, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, let's get into this. So the Book of Boba Fett was created by Jon Favreau, who also acts as an executive producer alongside Dave Filoni, who's known for his works on the, animated series that people absolutely love. But yeah, they've teamed up again after their huge success with The Mandalorian to come up with this series. And another person who's joining them in this endeavor is Robert Rodriguez. This is problem number one. I'm gonna stop right here. This is problem number one. I don't like Robert Rodriguez's work on The Mandalorian. The episodes that he directed in The Mandalorian season 2 were my least favorite episodes in terms of the directing, in terms of the aesthetics. I remember clearly saying that in my review of The Mandalorian season 2. The Mandalorian has seen some superb directors coming on board and taking on the projects, of each of these episodes. And unfortunately, in my opinion, Robert Rodriguez was never one of them. He was never one of them. Bryce Dallas Howard, if you told me that Bryce Dallas Howard was coming in as an executive producer, I've been like, cool, great idea, because the episode that she directed was superb. Brilliant. But in the case of Robert Rodriguez, no, I'm not feeling it. That was a mistake. Okay, so that was mistake number one. But anyway, we continue on. So we saw the beginning of Book of Boba Fett actually take place at the very end of Mandalorian season 2 with that end credit sequence where he's sitting down on the throne of some place. I am so sorry. I apologize in advance because I do not know the names of all of these places. Is it Mos Eisley or Mos other one? He sits on this throne and all of a sudden he is the kind of chief of this area. I'm just going to call him a chief. He has another name, but the Daimyo, I think it is. Oh my god, this is such a struggle. The Daimyo, here becomes the Daimyo, is the self-proclaimed Daimyo of the place. And everyone's looking at him like, what's going on? Some people don't trust him. He's trying to establish himself as a trustworthy leader who gains people's loyalty out of respect rather than fear, and yeah, it's basically him colonizing this place, low-key. Like, he's basically the bad guy. He is colonizing this place after killing its previous leader, which, yeah, like, he sucked. Okay, the previous leader sucked for sure, but the people have no reason to believe that he's any better. So he's trying to establish this new rule of respect and loyalty of the people, but based off of very little information that they have on him, other than the fact that he was a bounty hunter. So I feel like the series, as I'm saying this, should should have focused more on that point. But instead, the series kind of diverts its attention to these like drug wars that are happening on this planet as well, between the syndicate and, you know, these other players. And yeah, I feel like that was kind of a mistake. Maybe that's something that they should have saved for like a season 2 if they got one, or the latter half of season 1, after they've established, you know, the relationship that Boba Fett has as the Daimyo of this place with the actual people. Because I felt like the people were kind of missing from all of this. Like the people of Mos Eisley, is it? The people of Mos Eisley were barely even an afterthought in this series, which was interesting. And that again emphasized this feeling of him being the bad guy, because he didn't really care about the people themselves. He just cared about these power dynamics, which yeah, were definitely a pressing issue. But what was he fighting for? It was supposed to be for the people, but you never get a sense of that. Okay, side note, I did just look on Wikipedia and it says that he's actually the Daimyo of Tatooine. So he's the Daimyo of Tatooine, and I'm guessing the Mosses are like areas on the planet. That's clarified. Thank you very much, Wikipedia. Anyways, that was my issue when it came to the power dynamics that were explored in the series. It really had nothing to do with the people. He never felt like a man of the people. So it was like, well, why am I rooting for him to win? Other than the fact that we know he's Boba Fett, we know that he has a legacy in Star Wars, and we know that he's besties with the Mandalorian now, which obviously is always going to get the audience on his side. Now, another issue that this series unfortunately faced were the flashbacks. Oh no. Oh no, the flashbacks. Okay, so at first I didn't understand what was going on, I'll be honest. Like in the first episode I was like, what was this? I was very confused. Again, this is not an area of Star Wars that I'm very familiar with, so I was literally just thrown into the deep end here. But it turns out that they were flashbacks, and we do get to see him climbing out of the, oh, I know the word, is it a Sarlacc pit? I feel like it's the Sarlacc pit, right? He's climbing out of this like pit of like acid, and he finds himself in the middle of the desert where he's taken on by these desert people. I've forgotten their names, but anyway, he becomes a part of their like tribe. He becomes a part of the people, and he adopts their ways and he starts fighting alongside them. But then unfortunately we see in the flashbacks that they end up getting taken down by the syndicate, and so he is, you know, very bereaved, and he is very angry and wants revenge on the people that took them down. He thinks that it's this other like rival gang. I think the syndicate made him believe that it was someone else, but in reality it was them. So yeah, there's a whole plot point going on there in terms of the flashbacks and how they interact with the present day events, like for sure. But I do think that the flashbacks ultimately were a mistake. I do feel like the series would have done better had it been more linear. You still could have gotten flashbacks that would have explored Boba Fett's, you know, past and what he was doing in the meantime after he crawled out of that Sarlacc pit. But I just think the way that it was structured, the way that it was edited, something about it just did not seem very engaging. And it felt like the story was just cut in half, where whenever one half of the story would get engaging, we'd cut back to the present day or in the flashback, and it just didn't feel like it flowed very well. And also what was happening on screen wasn't always particularly interesting anyways. It didn't feel very high impact and dynamic, and some of the episodes were really quite forgettable. And again, I 100% think that if you are an avid Star Wars fan and there were certain Easter eggs in there or references in these episodes that you could appreciate, you would definitely get more out of these scenes. But for me, as someone who's standing very much on the outside of this fandom, just kind of enjoying from my position, I just think there was a lot that kind of, you know, washed right over my head. And I didn't really find some of these more expositional scenes, especially the ones that were in the flashbacks, as engaging. And also another problem with the flashbacks is that it felt like the story in the present day wasn't moving along particularly quickly. Like it felt like the story in the present day was just slugging along like a hut, honestly. Just slugging along, and you know, we were kind of pulling through it. It felt like nothing really happened in the span of the season, because because essentially what we got is that, you know, Boba Fett comes along, he becomes the Daimyo of Tatooine, he meets some competitors, or he's dealing with the politics of this region that he doesn't really fully understand, and he is helped by Fennec, who I will talk about in a second, okay, because she's the real Daimyo of this whole situation, of this whole operation. But yeah, he's helped along by her, and we do get to see how they met actually, which was nice. That's the kind of flashback that's actually helpful in my opinion. But yeah, he's helped along by her in these whole political negotiations, and then there's this big fight at the end, but it doesn't feel like a substantial series of events that could fill out a whole season for the show, especially not a streaming show. Like if we're talking a regular TV show, then fine, but because now we've become accustomed to streaming shows really pushing the boundaries, really doing crazy things here in terms of storytelling. Like if you think of what's going on in Marvel in terms of, you know, building the multiverse and exploring interdimensional travel and whatnot, I feel like this series felt very small and the present day events weren't as engaging as perhaps the series or the creators wanted it to feel. Okay, so now that I talked about the plot and the story of this series, I did just want to touch on the characters. And first one up, of course, we have the titular character himself, Boba Fett, who is portrayed by Temuera Morrison. After all of these years, I think it is incredible, truly incredible, that we've gotten to a point in Hollywood now where everything is so recycled that any actor who portrayed a relatively popular character 10, 20, even 30 years ago could be called up now by Disney, could be called up by a major studio to be like, listen, I don't know what you're doing now, but drop everything. You need to come to the studio immediately and reprise this role. Like, I think it is incredible how, you know, Hollywood has developed, especially when it comes to franchise building. They really do need everyone on board. I mean, just think about it. The next Star Wars series that we're getting is going to star Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan again. So again, like, it's just never over seemingly when it comes to these franchises. And here we have Temuera Morrison starring in his own Disney Plus series because of how popular his character was back in the day. Now, speaking of Boba Fett's popularity back in the day, even though I'm not an expert on all things Star Wars, as I keep saying, even I know that one of the aspects of the character that people really enjoyed about him was his kind of elusiveness and the fact that he was just this kind of mysterious entity that was super cool and had a really cool aesthetic. And I feel like this series kind of dampens that a little bit, if I'm being honest, because even though I am really happy to see Temuera Morrison get a chance to actually like act on this show, and he actually gets lines and actually gets to show his face and everything, I do think that it kind of taints the reputation of the character just a little bit, especially retrospectively, because his whole deal was that he didn't have much of a deal. Like, you didn't know what his deal was, basically. And now we know a little bit too much, especially considering that the story that was told about him wasn't the most interesting and engaging and revolutionary story ever. I think the key thing here when it comes to why perhaps The Mandalorian works so well and why Boba Fett as a character didn't quite work as well is, first of all, as I mentioned, he's a colonizer, but secondly, there wasn't that like personal aspect that The Mandalorian has. The Mandalorian is a very personal story. You don't need to be a Star Wars enthusiast to understand the story of The Mandalorian and his son, Baby Yoda, or Grogu. Okay, you don't need to know a lot about Star Wars to fully appreciate that storyline, whereas when it comes to Book of Boba Fett, you do need to be quite the Star Wars aficionado to appreciate all of these plot points. And I think the most effective storyline in this series was actually the most personal one, and that was when he became part of that desert people tribe. I think that was really effective and that episode was really gripping. But again, first of all, the flashbacks don't always work structurally speaking, and secondly, they end up getting killed off. So when we're in the present day, we don't even have that emotional connection anymore. Although there is, of course, one person who is always on Boba Fett's side, and that is my good sis Fennec. She was running the whole joint. She was running the whole joint. Every time Boba Fett was like, I'm the Daimyo, I was like, who, what, when, where, how? Who, what, when, where, how? How dare you? How dare you? You know Fennec Shand is doing everything here. She is running the whole joint, okay? And without her, you would be nowhere. You would have been killed the first night there. The first night there, you would have been assassinated successfully. How ridiculous. How ridiculous that this show is called Book of Boba Fett, when in reality, what I'm about to say is kind of mean, but he's the least interesting character in the show. He's literally like, I'm sorry, but he's the least cool character, because as soon as my guy the Mandalorian comes back, like, it's game over. As soon as we see that shiny metal armor, it's game over. So there's that. But even before he came back, Fennec Shand was running the actual show. She has the intellect, she has the street smarts, and also the skills physically. You know, she can deliver on those action sequences. I just kept wondering, why is she not in charge? Why is she not in charge? She's literally the full package. So yeah, I think that Fennec Shand is an excellent addition to the Star Wars mythos. And I think that Ming-Na Wen was superb in terms of her portrayal of the character. All around 5 stars. 5 stars for Fennec Shand. And then of course, next up, we need to talk about my guy, the Mandalorian himself. We need to talk about my guy, the world's favorite single father. Listen. Listen, when I heard the theme, the Mandalorian theme, by the way, side note, okay, the music for this series is also done by Ludwig Göransson, who did the music for The Mandalorian, as well as for Black Panther, which he won an Academy Award for. This guy is a musical genius. I've said this many times. He's one of my favorite composers working today. I think he is extraordinary. He is coming from John Williams' throat, I'm telling you. Anyway, the theme for Book of Boba Fett, it wasn't quite as catchy as the one for The Mandalorian. Like, even as I'm sitting here talking, I'm playing the theme for The Mandalorian in my head. Okay, but the Book of Boba Fett theme, you know, as the weeks went on, I became obsessed. Especially the beats, the bass as well was superb. So yeah, I did become obsessed with the theme. I think he does a spectacular job on every single project that he works on, and yeah, Ludwig is a fave. Ludwig is a fave in this household. But anyways, back to my guy, the Mandalorian, everyone's favorite single father. Yes, so when I heard the theme at the end of, I believe, episode 5 it was, where Fennec Shand is like, we need soldiers, and then you hear the Mandalorian theme, I was like, oh, it's about to go down. No, I thought it'd be a cameo though. I did not expect that episode 6 would literally just be an episode of The Mandalorian. It was welcome. It was welcome, but still I was like, oh, like, you're doing Boba Fett dirty. This was just an episode of The Mandalorian. And honestly, the whole conversation shifted at that point, because now it's like, ooh, what's the Mandalorian getting up to? And of course he delivered. Like, I'm sorry, but the charisma through his shiny metal armor is palpable. It's palpable. Pedro Pascal, absolutely. I don't even know if it was him physically there on set. Maybe it was a body double. But his voice work is excellent. That's why I'll say, like, I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, sure, but The Mandalorian, please. The Mandalorian is the best Star Wars to have ever Star Warsed. Absolutely. So already I was super excited when I saw that episode 6, or actually no, I think it was episode 5, and the idea was introduced in episode 4. Anyways, I was really excited when I saw that episode 5 was going to basically be an extension of the Mandalorian series. But then episode 6 comes along. Episode 6 comes along where we're reintroduced to my son. We are reintroduced to my child, Grogu. Guys, no, there are no words. There are actually no words. Like, I'm sorry, but I am here for the Mandalorian. His father went and made a tiny little armor for Grogu, for his son, okay? This like tiny medieval armor that you would put on a doll or a teddy bear. And he goes all the way to wherever it is that Luke is training Grogu. And he wants to see him. He waits for hours. R2-D2 is being useless, not giving any information. Although, of course, it put a massive smile on my face when I saw him. So he's just sleeping out there, and then we get to see Ahsoka. Oh my guys, this was the best episode of television ever. Truly ever. It was mind-blowing. Okay, so Ahsoka comes along, and you know, Rosario Dawson looking excellent, superb as the character, and they're interacting once again. But then get this, we get to see Grogu training. We get to see Grogu training with none other than Luke himself, the headmaster himself. Wow. So first of all, the CG. The CG was vastly improved. I remember, you know, after we got over the shock of the season finale of season 2 of The Mandalorian, a lot of us were like, that CG was looking a bit testy, was looking a bit off. But this time around, they definitely invested in some, you know, better animators or more time or better technology or whatever. I believe I heard a story that they had actually hired some people who had made a mock-up of the CG online, and they'd posted it on YouTube using like deep fake technology or something. I'm not sure if that's true, if I've made that up, but I believe Disney may have hired those people. Either way, it looks much better this time around, and I have faith that for every appearance that we'll get of CG Mark Hamill, it will keep getting better, because the technology is there. It's just about the money and the time, but I feel like both were improved this time around, and the results definitely show on screen. And secondly, of course, there's the shock of seeing Luke train Grogu to begin with, of seeing the roles reversed. You know, when you think back to Empire Strikes Back, I think it's Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi, where he's being trained by Yoda, and he's learning all of these things, to see him actually impart that knowledge onto Grogu, to see these similar scenes playing out with Grogu jumping along this like idyllic environment, you know, this very peaceful environment that they're in. I think it was just amazing. Oh, that was the best thing ever. I can't believe we got those scenes in a TV show. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying like TV shows, the streaming shows that we get these days, they push the boundaries of our expectations. And I think this episode in particular, episode 6 of Book of Boba Fett, really did that. So then anyways, going back to the Mandalorian in this episode, unfortunately he wasn't able to see his son. You know, Ahsoka said that it was really painful, that separation was really painful for Grogu, so seeing him again would just, you know, bring up those emotions again for him. And the Mandalorian decided to do what was right for his child. I'm telling you, he's the best father ever. He decided to do what was right for his child, but he still gave him the gift of the, you know, armor that he had made for him out of the like special metal for the Mandalorian suits. And Ahsoka at first I was afraid that Ahsoka would not give it to Grogu, because they would want him to like forget the Mandalorian entirely, but I'm glad that she did give it to Luke. Okay, we saw them interacting, which is a big deal for you Star Wars fans, and then and then Luke ends up giving Grogu a choice. He puts a lightsaber down, he puts the armor down, and he says, which one do you want? Like, what is your path? What is the path that you choose for yourself? And so yeah, that's how episode 6 ends, and of course we see the answer to that in episode 7 in the finale. But that was just an extraordinary episode, wonderful episode. And guess who directed that one? Dave Filoni. And also, just to mention some of the other characters that we got on the show, we also got the return of Timothy Olyphant's Cobb Vanth, and he is actually brutally attacked by this new blue character. Hold on, let me look up his name. Cad Bane, that's his name, Cad Bane. Apparently he's a big deal from the Clone Wars series. All I can say is he looked menacing as hell. Menacing as hell. And I think it's Corey Burton who is the voice of the character. His voice was insane. Yeah, he was terrifying. I hope he's not actually dead. I think he's too cool to just kill off after one season of the show, because he was a legit really good villain. Very menacing. Okay, so I hope he's still around. And I also hope that Timothy Olyphant's character is still around. I believe he was in that, is it the Scepter tank? I can't remember what it's called, but I believe he was in the healing tank that Boba Fett uses at the very end, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully he should return for Mandalorian Mandalorian season 3. And also, speaking of Mandalorian characters coming back, I was really happy to see Amy Sedaris' character return, especially when she was hanging out with a Mandalorian, making his new ship, which, by the way, I'm not a fan of. Not a fan of the new ship, especially when Baby Yoda was in there. You know, he couldn't really interact with him because he's just behind. So I'm not the biggest fan of the new Mandalorian ship. I hope he gets like an actual ship again soon. But then, of course, when she was reunited with Grogu, aka Baby Yoda, again, I think that was really adorable. She's like this like kind of messy, kind of all over the place auntie that Grogu has sometimes as a babysitter, and she's really come to like him and to enjoy his company, as have the droids. So I really like that dynamic, and I love seeing her back in this series again. And then, of course, we have the finale, which I've kind of already touched on, but unfortunately the finale kind of fell flat for me. You know, when we emerged from the 2 episodes of The Mandalorian, we returned back to the Book of Boba Fett proper, and it did leave a little bit to be desired, unfortunately. I don't think that the finale quite landed. I also felt like, I can't remember who directed the finale, probably Robert Rodriguez, but I also felt like the way that it was staged felt staged. It didn't feel like an actual battle. It didn't really feel like an actual gang war. I think also the village itself, I think it's Mos Espa, it felt very empty. And that goes back to what I was saying about the lack of people in this area. It didn't feel like the villagers were running away in fear. It didn't feel like there were real stakes in terms of casualties here. The main people that were outside during this whole confrontation were the fighters, like on either side, but there weren't any, you know, innocent civilians just running around or kids running around in danger. So it didn't really feel like a pressing kind of high stakes situation. It just felt like a political game. And again, it adds to this idea that Boba Fett, in reality, he's just another politician who's not really fighting on behalf of the people, because we never get to see him fight for the people. And sure, he's always repeating this rhetoric of, you know, get this spice, you know, out of this land, it's ruining our people and whatnot. Obviously, spice being a stand-in for drugs in the Star Wars world. But again, if we had actually gotten to know the people of Mos Espa, aside from the people in that club that was run by that very clever lady, if we'd actually gotten to know them, if we actually gotten to see him roam around in the markets and, you know, hang out with people, get to know them on a more personal level, as opposed to him just proclaiming himself as their Daimyo, I think it would have been a bit more effective in terms of earning the people's respect as their leader, and then him ultimately defending them when the time came when the Pike Syndicate was threatening the land. I do think that the show tried to establish this relationship with the cyborg biker gang people. That was cheesy as hell. No, that was cheesy as hell. First of all, their bikes were way too brightly coloured for the world of Star Wars. They looked like they came from somewhere else. They looked like they came from the MCU, like a Guardians of the Galaxy film, honestly. So yeah, they didn't fit into Star Wars at all for me personally. I think also the actors were a little bit too the theatre, I don't know, it just didn't feel authentic to the world of Star Wars. They really stuck out like a sore thumb, and also they weren't a part of the everyday regular folk of Mos Espa either. And also it doesn't help Boba Fett's case that the only people that he connected with from Mos Espa were the people that he could use to fight on his side. And so with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving the Book of Boba Fett a 6.5 out of 10. Honestly, if the finale had landed, it would have been a solid 7, but the finale kind of let me down, if I'm being honest. The finale really let me down. Also, just as a side note, the monster that was introduced to us earlier on in the season, that was given to Boba Fett by the Hutt twins, I think they were. That was very disappointing, that kind of big reveal. I thought we would have seen a bit more footage of Boba Fett actually learning to, you know, ride the monster, you know, having that connection with it. But luckily enough, the monster imprints on any first human being that he lays eyes on, so they didn't have to establish that working bond, that familiarity for very long. And I guess that makes sense because the series is only 7 episodes, which also, why is there only 7 episodes? don't like that. But as it stands, then yeah, 7 episodes is more than enough for what we actually ended up getting. But now that I told you guys my thoughts on the Book of Boba Fett, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this series down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.